Please welcome NYU's Adam Alter.
So if you're anything like me, occasionally you've watched as a disaster unfolds on TV and you feel terrible about it and you don't do anything. So there's this big gap between your intentions, which are very good, and what you actually do. And this is a really big problem facing all sorts of people. It faces people who are trying to extract aid from you when disasters hit. It's true about anyone who runs a non-profit. It's basically true anytime you're trying to get people to be generous when they feel that a cause is important. So this is a big issue, and it's partly a big issue because of how much we're talking about, money-wise. So if you look at disasters, every year disasters come to about $100 billion. That's how much damage they do, which is so much that 2/3 of the countries on Earth would be bankrupted if you were to take what they were worth and put them towards dealing with those disasters. So we're talking about a huge sum of money. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to suggest a very, very simple intervention that's basically free. It doesn't cost much at all, but it increases giving sometimes 2, sometimes 3, sometimes even 10 times. So basically, to start, what I want to do to illustrate this idea, this is a strange way to begin perhaps, but what I'd like you to do is to look at the letters of the alphabet, the Roman alphabet. I'd like you to think about your 3 favorites. It's a task you probably haven't engaged in before. Just spend maybe a few seconds thinking about this. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if at least one of the letters happens to be the first letter in your first name, your middle name, or your last name. So like 95, 99% of you. It's a massive, massive majority. It's certainly true for me. I'm very attracted to the letter A. And that's a very common response. It's a sign that you all think reasonably highly of yourselves. It's a good measure of self-esteem. So that's a good thing. This seems like just sort of an idly interesting fact, but it also turns out to be a very powerful idea because it suggests something about how we might approach people to encourage them not just to feel like being generous, but to actually be generous. I'm going to get to that in a second, but the basic idea here is that we like things in the world around us that remind us of ourselves, that carry something about ourselves in them. So that's certainly true with letters of the alphabet. It's true with the way people pick lottery numbers. This is a data set from 15 years of the National Lottery in the UK. So what I'm showing you here is all the numbers from 1 to 49, and on the vertical here, this is how common they are, how commonly chosen they are. The most common number I've given a value of 100, and this is what you see. So you see some are more common than others. You can see, for example, that the lucky number 7 is the most common. But what's really striking about this is you can break the numbers down into those that refer or apply to birthdays and those that don't. And this is what you see. So the green ones are birthday related, the red ones are not birthday related. And when you interview people, they are dramatically more likely to pick the numbers that are associated with their own birthdays and sometimes with the birthdays of other people. So even though this is a random draw, they are drawn to these numbers. They think they're going to be luckier when those numbers are associated with themselves. In fact, statisticians say that if you're going to play the lottery, pick numbers that are higher than 31, because if you do win, you're going to share your winnings with many fewer people. So, you see this as well in the way we pick our pets. There's a fantastic paper, it's about 10 years old now, from a journal called Psychological Science. And what happened was the authors took a whole lot of pets and a whole lot of their owners, and they separated them. These are extreme examples, but what you find is if you say to people, try to guess who is the owner of each pet, when they match them together, they find that people are very often accurate. And the reason they're accurate is because people like pets that look like themselves. So in the world at large, we like things that remind us of ourselves, even in ways you might not expect. So the way we like letters that remind us of ourselves, we like numbers, we like pets that remind us of ourselves. So now, having shown that, I want to get to the intervention. So as I said, we have here the letters of the alphabet, and I've shown you that you're attracted in some ways to the letters that are associated with you. And it turns out that this is important because we name a lot of things. One of the things we name are hurricanes. So these are 2 of the very damaging hurricanes from the 2005 Atlantic hurricane season. It's the most damaging season of all time. You've got Katrina on the left and Rita on the right. And since you are attracted to the letters that are associated with your name, some researchers wanted to see whether that might translate into differential giving patterns. And what they found was that people gave 2.5 times more when they had K names to Katrina than to any of the other hurricanes that year. And people with R names gave 3.6 times more to Rita than to any of the other hurricanes that year. So it's a dramatic increase in giving to hurricanes that happen to share their first initials. Now, as you can imagine, they're not saying, that reminds me of me, I should give more. But there's something about this shared initial that's driving this form of generosity. They're going beyond just saying, I feel terrible about the victims of these hurricanes, and they actually end up giving more. It's a pretty striking effect. We can also use this fact. It's not just an interesting idea in retrospect, but we can go forward and use this to encourage people to give more as well. So what I'm showing you here again is that same picture with all the letters. And what you can do is you can look at the way we name people in the US, and you can find out which letters are more common as initials. And I'm going to show you by changing the size of each of these letters which ones are more common. So J and M, very common. A, C, D, R, a couple of the others are very common. You'll also see that some don't even show up because they're just so uncommon. It's very rare to see someone with a name that begins with U compared to, say, the letter J. And once we know that people are more likely to give to hurricanes that happen to have the same initials, that suggests something about the way we name our hurricanes. The way we go now is just alphabetically. So here I'm going to show you, this is the list for 2015. It's an alphabetical list. 21 of the 24 letters are represented. And what you can do is you can calculate, based on how many people share these initials, what kind of boost you would get if that hurricane happened to do a lot of damage and you were trying to extract aid from people. And I'll show you here, it varies pretty dramatically. So what you find is that if, we hope there won't be any damaging hurricanes, but if this year Hurricane Joaquin happens to do a lot of damage, we'll get a big boost from all the J people out there who suddenly become dramatically more generous. The same for Mindy. Unfortunately, Hurricanes Odette and Ida are going to extract a lot less aid because you get a much smaller boost from that match between people's initials and the name of the hurricane. So what this suggests is that we're misnaming our hurricanes. Once you understand how much an effect the name has on giving, that suggests we should probably be a little bit more careful, a little more strategic with the way we name them. So what you find, for example, I can show you how much of a difference it makes. If you look at the 27 most damaging hurricanes between 2000 and 2012, the donations for those 27 amounted to about $10 billion. It's a lot of money. You can run a simulation and you can work out that if you had named those hurricanes a little more strategically so they mirrored the American population more effectively, that number would jump to 10.7. So we're effectively leaving $700 million on the table because the Weather Service in the 50s decided to just randomly use the alphabetical list. What this shows you is how powerful these first impressions can be, and how once you understand human psychology and what drives generosity, you can make very inexpensive changes to the world and have dramatic effects on the sorts of behaviors that people engage in. I want to show you another context, because if people are attracted to their initials, you can imagine how attracted they are to their own names, their full names. You've probably all done this before. Googled yourselves and wondered if there's anyone else out there who happens to share your name. And when you look and do an image search, you'll find something like this. It's kind of fascinating. I met the Adam Alter on the left here, actually, randomly. His dad actually contacted my family. And when I met his dad, whose name is Alan, I said to him, "That's so funny. My name's Adam and your name's Alan." And he said, "Actually, my son has exactly the same name as yours. His name is Adam." And we've spent some time together and hung out. And it's amazing how strong that bond is. It begins nowhere. You don't know this person at all, but because you share a name with them, it has a very powerful bonding effect. So what I wanted to do was to apply this. And I did some work with Donors Choose. Some of you probably know about Donors Choose. It's a large organization. And what happens basically is teachers who are working in public schools can apply for crowdfunding. So what you might do is you might say, "I'm a teacher, I'd like to work on a project with my students, but I don't have funding. I'd like to build a replica of a ship, for example. And I need some wood and some glue and some crayons, and I need a total of $100. And you post that on the site, and then any of us could go on the site and fund that project or any other project. So what we did was, on Valentine's Day, they sent out a series of emails. It was a very big campaign this year. We varied the nature of the emails. So here is an email to Rita Minton. I'm just picking a random person's name. The one version of the email was without a matching name. And so what they did was they sent out this email: "Dear Rita, roses are red, violets are blue. We heart this teacher and hope you do too. Give today to the classroom of Mrs. Watson." Now, notice that Mrs. Watson doesn't have the same name as Mrs. Minton, Rita Minton. But because they have so many people in their database, they were able to match people with teachers who happen to share their surnames. So there are 500,000 emails that went out, half of them matching and half of them non-matching. So the matching version looked like this: "Dear Rita, roses are red, violets are blue. Give to a teacher with the same name as you. Give today to the classroom of Mrs. Minton, a teacher in New York, New York." So it's a very similar email. The big difference there is the name is matching. And this has pretty massive consequences for giving. And I'll show you what I mean by that. First of all, you can see that people are driven by this matching property. So Karen Hickey from New Jersey gave and said it's because I'm Mrs. Hickey too. You can actually explain why you're deciding to give. Todd Pelletier from Fort Lauderdale said, Miss Pelletier, keep up the great work for those kids on behalf of your namesake. And I think it's Bruisma, Jamie Bruisma, found someone who happened to share her name, which is an unusual one. They actually found out they were related, and so they started talking offline about that. So it's a very powerful driver of connection and a very powerful driver of giving, and I'm going to show you how powerful. So the non-matching name version, for every 1,000 emails sent, garnered about $10. The matching name version, 8 times as much, $80 for every 1,000 emails. It's hard to get donations to go up by just a couple of dollars, but for them to go up eight times is pretty dramatic. Here's another metric. So for every email that was opened, once people did open them, they were much more generous, more than 10 times as generous, when the person they were dealing with was a teacher who happened to share their name. Again, a pretty dramatic statistic. And finally, if you look at the size of the average donation, people weren't just more willing to give. When they did give, they felt much more generous. So they gave more than 3 times as much to the teachers who happened to match their names. So this form of bonding costs nothing to match people together in this way. It costs nothing to change how we name our hurricanes, but it has an incredibly strong effect on how generous people are. Not just that they feel like being generous, but they actually behave much more generously. One other really interesting statistic is that a lot of the people who gave had not given for more than a year. That's pretty rare. Usually people who don't give to a cause for more than a year are very tough to get back into the fold. And the 44% of the people who gave were this kind of donor, so they're the toughest ones to reach a lot of the time. So what I want to end with is the idea that behavioral science, understanding why people give, understanding how powerful it is when you see yourself in the cause, beats brute force. And by brute force, I just mean the idea that you can convince people with logic and reason to give. It's really tough to do that, and that's the way politicians work. It's the way a lot of people work in a lot of different contexts. And I think once you understand how these very inexpensive interventions can have these huge magnified effects, you're much better placed to extract more generosity from people.